should we wait for 5 minutes or so, or?
Yeah, I think we should wait for people to join.
Okay.
Okay, I think it's going live and it's broadcast across our LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook pages. I think we can begin the presentation. Yeah. Hi everyone, welcome and greetings from Center for Gender and Politics. Today we have a presentation where we are presenting our new report titled Gender Analysis of Nepal's Local Elections May 2022. My name is Akhil and I am the director of CGAP. We are a registered nonprofit based in India where we work towards bridging the research gap on gender and politics in South Asian context. While research is the core of what we do, we also work across awareness, capacity building, and advocacy verticals. Today, I have with me my colleagues from Nepal, Prasiddhi, Shrestha, and Kritika Giri. Prasiddhi is the Nepal country representative at CGAP. She is a recent graduate in political science from Sciences Po Paris, where she specialized in Asian politics. She is most interested in topics surrounding gender, social justice, and conflict and security. I also have with me Kritika Giri. Kritika is also the Nepal country representative at CGAP. She's a recent high school graduate who is passionate about feminism, queer rights, and gender. She works with Office for Safe and Respectable Learning OSRL, supporting LGBTQ plus rights in Nepal. I would also like to take this opportunity to acknowledge individuals who made contributions to this report. Miss Lakshmi, Akriti, Simone, and Ritisha, who have contributed to this report. And also, I'd like to acknowledge the entire volunteer community at CGAP, without whom this would not have been possible. Today, we are covering uh, right from historical background and legal framework under which Nepal's local elections were held in May 2022 to women as voters, candidates, and winners. We would also like to touch upon the aspects of men's allyship and some of the lessons we learned from our observation of this local election and some of the recommendations generated by our work to the stakeholders who are working on this elections. I would also like to bring to your notice a disclaimer that the data we used here in this report is presented in good faith, and most of the data has been uh, sourced from credible sources such as the Election Commission. But if you find any discrepancies with any of the data we presented today, we would urge you to go to the Election Commission's website and also write to us in case of any discrepancies you find. With that, I think we begin our presentation. Over to you, Kritika.
So, hello everybody, I'm Kritika, and for today's report analysis for Nepal's local level election 2022, I will be covering all of the quantitative part. So, let's get right into it. Before talking about this year's local level election, let's get to know a bit about the background of Constitution of Nepal. Nepal adopted a federal system in 2015 by abandoning its age-old, highly centralized and unitary state structure. The 2015 Constitution of Nepal established a federal system in Nepal with three levels of government, and they are federal, provincial, and local level government. It was done for the decentralization of power to achieve the overall development in each parts of the country. As for the local level system, it consists of metropolitan city, sub-metropolitan city, municipalities, and rural municipalities. The first local level election was held in 2017 and was significant and historic for women and their representation in politics. The second local level election was held in May 2022 for the total of 753 local units. Next slide, please. So, as per talking about the legal framework, we have a mayor and a deputy mayor elected for the metropolitan, sub-metropolitan, and municipality, whereas we have a chairperson and a vice chairperson elected for the rural municipalities. For each wards of this four-level system, we have a ward chairperson and four ward members. Here, for the post of ward members, there is a quota system which includes one woman from open category and one woman from the minority community. But here in Nepal, the minority post is directed towards the Dalit woman. So the total of 2 out of 4 ward members are reserved seats for women candidates. So for a total of 6,743 wards across the country, there will be at least 13,486 women and at least 6,743 will be Dalit women elected. The Election Commission mandates that at least 40.4% of the total nominees be women. The Local Level Election Act 2017 has made it mandatory for each political party fielding candidates for both the leadership positions to ensure that one of them is woman, so that the local unit be gender even. That is, if a political party nominated a man for the mayor's position, a woman had to be nominated for the deputy mayor or vice versa. However, in 2022, major political parties formed alliances to contest elections for having the assured win. So, as they formed alliance, they fielded candidates for only one of these positions and did not adhere this rule. This was put forward by many women leaders of Nepal to direct the attention of Supreme Court, but the issue didn't get the priority it deserved. Next slide, please. Talking about the voter registration and eligibility, according to Article 6 of the Electoral Roll Act 2017, an eligible voter must be a Nepali citizen, at least 18 years old, and a permanent resident of the relevant ward. This time, the number of registered men voters was greater than that of registered women voters. Next slide, please. Election Commission views everyone who does not belong to gender binary as others. It is also very difficult to change their gender or name in the voter ID since their citizenship has the gender assigned at their birth. This affects the LGBTQIA community adversely, and an example of it is Noor Casey, a 23-year-old trans woman from Kaski, couldn't make a voter's identity card even though she wanted to exercise her franchise. Her citizenship states her gender as male, and she hasn't been able to change her name nor her gender in her citizenship till date. She says, if I had made my voter's identity card for the upcoming election, then the card would have stated my gender as male. I have faced a lot of problems due to my citizenship and other government documents misgendering me, so I don't want to face similar humiliations in order to vote. Our government confuses all the LGBTQI people as third gender, says Casey. I'm a trans woman and I want to vote as a woman. The only way for transgender people, the only way to, sorry, the only way for transgender people to have a safe and inclusive voting environment is for provisions to allow us to change our name and gender on our legal documents. Although Nepal's constitution acknowledges the LGBTQIA rights, there is still a long run for people to acknowledge their rights from a social aspect as they continue to face humiliation and are not given priority and access in the polling booth lines. Another example of this is the experience of Ruxana Kapali, a trans woman and a trans rights activist. She said, when I went to vote, I had a voter's identity card as third gender, but since there was no separate lines beside male and female, I joined the line for females as it is the gender I identify with. The officials at the voting booth stared at my card, then at me for some time while the people behind were allowed to go ahead and vote without any delay. After the officials discussed amongst themselves for some time, they allowed me to go and vote. It was a humiliating experience for me. When they openly identify as others, they face humiliation, taboo, making it difficult to avail any special provisions made available by the Election Commission. Next slide, please. Now, let's talk about the number of women candidates contested political party wise. As you can see from the pie chart and also from the bar diagram, the number and percentage of women candidates contested are quite good. All major political parties have fielded about 40% women as candidates, and overall 36% of total candidates were women. But only 15% of those who contested as independents were women. Next slide, please. When we look into the depth and bigger picture, as you can see in the bar graph of women candidates by post, the number of women's candidacy mostly increased due to the quota system, which included at least 2 women in the position of ward members. Majority of women are thought to fit only for secondary roles, such as for deputy positions, and that too to simply to satisfy the inclusion provision. This time, only 37.84% women were contesting for the local election. So for the next slide, yeah. So for a quick comparison of women's candidacy for the year 2017 and 2022, we can direct our attention to the bar graph soon. We can clearly see that there is a downward trend, which is really worrisome for the second ever local election, with 40.96% women's candidacy in 2017's election, whereas only 37.84% of women's candidacy in 2022 local level election. So for the next slides, I'd like to pass the mic to Prasiddhi. Over to you, Prasiddhi.
Akhil, can you just make sure that you hear me?
Sorry, we are hearing a lot of echo, Prasiddhi.
Right, right.
Can you speak now?
So I think the echoing is a persistent problem.
Now it's fine. We don't hear any
We,
echo.
Yeah, with the video off, it's like clear.
okay. I'll just speak with my video off. I hope no one minds that. So sorry about that. Moving on to the qualitative aspects of things, I just wanted to talk briefly about the barriers that women candidates may face, as seen in the case of this election as well. So what we saw for this election was that there were almost 60,000 women candidates in the local election, but most of them fielded for the position of a women ward member or a Dalit women ward member, instead of participation for higher offices such as mayor or deputy mayor. So there were two main narratives that came into play, either directly or indirectly, where we mentioned these sort of things. And the first one was that they lack the capacity, and the second is that there aren't enough women who want to take on the role. So for the first one, it's quite simple. It was often presented and sort of just delegated into action. When women are casted as deputy mayors, they are seen better fit for positions of someone under someone else. Whereas for the second one, it was just saying that there is a problem from the supply side. So there just aren't enough qualified women who want to take on a responsibility. And with both of them, what we found is that they sort of have this underlying assumption that competition takes place within a fair system. And both these narratives majorly question the ability of women and undermine both the systematic and day-to-day discouragement that they may face in the political space. Can we go to the next slide, Akhil? All right. So another barrier that women faced in this election was the political alliances and the legal provisions around it. So Kritika already mentioned it before, but again, because political parties weren't obligated to field a women contestant, this did lead to cases where there were some female politicians who had been deputy mayors or ward members in the past who had aspirations of contesting for higher positions like mayor and chairperson, but they simply weren't given the opportunity because one, parties were simply not mandated to do so anymore, and two, because there were other male contestants who had more political or financial networks or connections that helped them become the singular member who the party would send. So here's a quote from Usha Malnopatrak, who's a senior lawyer for the online cover as well. So she states that in a patriarchal political realm, men will want to stake their claim in terms of power. And this is what we see happening in the case of political alliances as well. Next slide, please. So political alliances are definitely a big problem, but they don't act on their own. It's rather an add-on to the already existing discriminatory system that affects women's participation in politics. So this begins within parties where central authorities give rather vague instructions on how candidates may be selected, and the subjectivity of the entire matter often invites implicit and explicit gender stereotyping. So some of the instructions that party leaders often give while looking for these candidates, as cited by an excellent report by the Asia Foundation, are popularity, sacrifices, contributions, charisma, loyalty to the party. Now, because these are so heavily focused on a perceived background of an individual, men have a higher chances in these places for being selected for several reasons. So the first one is that while women too have contributed to political events and histories in their areas, their efforts are more likely to be sidelined by the efforts of men. So there has been research behind this which shows that the works of men are more likely to be praised or recognized over the work of women. And this means that on the grounds that someone has to judge the contributions of an individual to the party, uh, it is more likely that they would choose a man because it is a man's contribution that has higher priority. Um, I'm just stopping here once again, Akhil. If there is a problem with my audio, please let me know. So anyway, moving on to the second issue is that in such a system, this system sort of creates an assurance to a small number of men who feel entitled to these seats. So this would be a group of men accumulated over the years who are waiting for a platform that recognizes their past contributions, not necessarily just to society, but also just to the party financially and politically. So this becomes a problem as it creates a platform in which, on the one hand, women are not chosen to run for offices because they lack political and financial means. But on the other hand, women can't gain political and financial support because they are not chosen to run for office. So it's sort of a cyclical pattern as observed. And lastly, another thing that that there is that there are certain implicit biases when we mention traits like charisma and popularity. And this has to do with our socialization that occurs within our society, in which we are more likely to correlate certain words with of politics with men. So for example, when we talk about the suitability of the leader, this might be influenced by how strong or how confident a leader is, in which case these are traditionally traits that are just associated with masculinity. So this automatically works in the favor of men while candidates are being selected. And what doesn't help with all of this is that there are the selection committees for these candidates are oftentimes male dominated and hence lack a diversity of perspective. So moving on to Kritika.
So, as we talked about women's candidacy in the prior slides, now let's talk about the number of women elected in this year's local election. We can direct our attention in the presented bar graph. We can clearly see the least number of women being elected in the actual leadership positions, like only 4% of women are elected as mayors, only 3% of women are elected as chairpersons, and only 1% of women are elected as ward chairpersons. As seen, the representation of women is shown merely as subordinates. Despite an increased participation of women in politics over the past 2 decades or so, their progress in leadership positions still continues to be hindered. Even if our constitution has many progressive provisions, they do not mean much if they are still being openly flaunted to give continuity to the patriarchal status. Next slide, please. Yeah. For the position of ward members, as there is a quota system that assures the participation of at least 2 women as mentioned earlier, the win rate of women in the unreserved ward member post is likely to be decreased. This time, around 3% of women are elected for unreserved ward member post. Next slide, please. Talking about the number of women elected party-wise, all major political parties now have about 40% women elected among total winners from respective parties. However, they are fielded and elected for lower positions and not at the actual leadership positions as shown earlier. So we can denote the numbers as celebratory win for women in leadership. The presence of women does not necessarily guarantee that women's interests are protected. Overall, 41.21% of the total elected are women. One thing that caught our attention was the win rate of independent women candidates. They only had 15% of total candidacy, but now we have 32% of independent women candidates who actually won. So in aspect of independent women candidates, we can see a hope of better and quality involvement of women in politics. Next slide, please. Now let's compare the number of women elected in 2017 and 2022. As per the data from Election Commission, 41.21% of women are among the total elected in 2022 versus 40.9% in 2017. So even though there is a downward trend of women contestants in 2022 local elections, the final number of women who got elected seems to be marginally higher than that of 2017's election. This clearly indicates the higher winnability displayed by the women candidates in 2022's local level election. While tremendous opportunities exist for women's political participation in Nepal within the new political structure, this should translate into creating a substantive representation of women and political decision making over only having big numbers of women's presence from non-leadership positions. Over to you, Prasiddhi.
Uh, okay, I'm just gonna go on without my video. Um, okay, so nevertheless, there were still notable wins in this election, of which we have mentioned just 4 of them. The first one was the case of Sunita Dongal, who is the deputy mayor of Kathmandu, who secured her position with a significantly higher number of votes than her opponent. The next is Meena Lama, who is the first indigenous woman to be elected as the mayor of Hidora, another major city in Nepal. The third there was Kaushalya Devi, who won as the mayor of Ishanath after disputes arising in the counting site due to initially miscalculated votes. And lastly, there's Renu Dal, who is the first indigenous woman to be elected as the mayor of Allyship, another major city in Nepal. So
Prasiddhi,
most
we
of these
can't.
leaders acknowledge. Hello?
Yes, please go on now. We can.
Do you know where I cut off? So I can just start again.
You can start from Renu Dal's win.
All right. So for Renu Dal, she has secured her position again as the mayor of Hidora, of Bharatpur for the second time, and this sort of establishes a form of consistent influence of hers in this area. So with these women leaders, we also notice a trend where they are more likely to talk about women's rights and well-beings, as seen for 3 of these women. I've mentioned them on the slides as well. They mentioned women's health, women's security, financial and physical both, respectively. So can we go to the next slide? So this election, we also particularly wanted to mention men's allyship. This I think for CGAP as a whole, we stress on particularly because in a patriarchal society, We believe that men's allyship has the potential to increase more than anything situational awareness and more widely recognize and hence act upon gender discrimination as a whole. So, men's allyship can come in the form of promoting women in leadership, cheering them on. Sure, very few cases of men's allyship, and most of it was men campaigning for women colleagues, mostly from their own party. So some of them were Gagan Thapa in support of his colleague Shrestha, who ran for Kathmandu mayor. There was Prachanda, who spoke in support of his daughter Renu Dal. And finally, there was Sherbadur Thapa, who rallied in support of Renu Dal and Shrestha, who is his colleague in his party. Can we go to the next slide? And there were cases of gendered violence and abuse during the run up to the elections and on the election day itself. These were noted by the National Women's Commission, who then wrote to the Election Commission to assure safety. But in summary, there was an event in Chaudhary and Shivaraj where there were cases of physical abuse towards women. And on the other hand, there was also a case in Kathmandu where a prominent mayoral candidate, Keshav Stapit, had basically verbally abused someone who was sort of trying to seek accountability from him for previous sexual assault allegations that were against him. Next slide, please. Now that we're coming to sort of the end of the presentation, here are some lessons we believe we've learned for these elections. The first one is that political parties remain the primary vehicle for women to enter politics, although there were a few surprising wins by independents, but most women did enter through a political party. Second is that there's a lack of gender sensitization amongst men in politics, which leads to them not fielding women and also dominating their parties and alliances without sharing their spaces with others. The third is that there's a lack of gender sensitive. There's a long way to go in merely acknowledging LGBTQIA communities and also their representation and participation in Nepalese politics. The fourth is that we see that despite a decrease in the number of female contestants in 2017, there is actually a marginally higher number of women who won in these elections that shows a higher winnability amongst them. And lastly, we observe that there's a huge potential for strengthening institutional bases like the election commissions who work to hold accountability in case parties do not uphold the quota requirement and the gender equality that has been mentioned in the spirit of the Constitution. On to the next slide. And finally, based on our observations, here are a list of recommendations we have for future reference and use. So the first one comes based on our own experience and is something that we believe many others would encounter, and is that the Election Commission should undertake necessary steps to make available accurate and gender disaggregated information. So mainly political, party-wise, post-wise, province-wise, ward-wise, etc. So doing so would help in the production and analysis of several reports and data such as this one that could then be put to further use to advance social equality. The second is that laws must be enacted to make sure that political parties, leadership, and committees that decide on candidates include women. Right now, the fact that these committees themselves lack diversity in some sorts perpetuate the dominance of men within political spheres. The next is that is for the Election Commission to acknowledge the presence of the LGBTQIA community, most particularly the transgender people who in all steps of the process face a sort of seclusion. So simply including a section for others is not enough. For a free and fair election, the state needs to assure that everyone must be able to safely identify as a certain gender themselves, and also safely vote and contest in the elections without facing gender discrimination. The fourth is that while we notice some support for agendas like greater political awareness amongst women or support for gender-aware policies in Nepal by NGOs, we believe that there needs to be an equally strong support for female politicians before they have been elected during their pre-election phase, So we have seen through our research that women often need financial and political support, without which they do not have an opportunity to even contest in the first place. So this is something where they would need more support. The fifth is that once women do participate in politics, we believe that civil society organizations and international NGOs working in Nepal may initiate training programs for women who got elected in these elections, so the incumbent women are re-elected next time as well. Lastly, there is a lastly, seeing that the candidate selection process today heavily favors men, as it significantly focuses on subjective matters like likability or sacrifice, or focuses on perceived political backgrounds of an individual, we strongly believe that there should be an emphasis be made on the actual political qualifications and the agendas of the prospective candidates. So these were some points that we'd like to mention. And finally, back to you, Akhil.
Thank you, Prasiddhi. This brings us to the end of our presentation. Let's look at some of the comments we have. And thank you very much for joining us today. And if you have any feedback and queries, please write to us at the email mentioned here, which is contact@cgapsouthasia.org, and visit us at cgapsouthasia.org for to know more about our work and research. Let's quickly look at some of the comments we have. Thank you, Shivangi. Thank you, Sakshi. Also, Milan, the slides and the entire report is available on our website. It's also posted across our social media platforms, so you can go and check it out. And there's one more comment from Milan on the number of Dalit women. So I would like to clarify here that the data we used for this particular report is the latest bulletin, which is made available by the Election Commission, dated May 20th, 2022. Uh, this this latest bulletin seemed to have missed a few wards winners data in the larger context. I think it's also because of the re-election which happened to some of the wards because of the interruptions. But like we mentioned earlier in the start of the presentation, these were some of the discrepancies we found with the election commission data, and that's why we put in one of our recommendations, which is to the election commission to make available the accurate gender disaggregated data across all levels, be it post wise, be it political party wise, be it ward wise, municipality wise, metropolitan wise, uh, etc. I think with this, I would like to thank everyone once again for joining us today. I would also like to thank my colleagues Pritika and Prasiddhi join and give this presentation despite the heavy rains you have in Kathmandu. So this video will also be available across Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn pages of Women for Politics. Thank you, see you, and goodbye.